Good afternoon. We welcome you back to our Sister Parish webinar series. Today, moderating with myself, Kathy Camp, Pastoral Associate here at St. Joseph's, is Nancy Veronese, our Director of Worship at St. Joseph's, and also our Deacon, Duncan Harris, is assisting our speaker. And our speaker today, we're very, very delighted to have Father Bob Krekel, our quote-unquote retired priest in residence here at St. Joseph's and Holy Spirit. We say retired in quotes because he's one of the busiest retired people I've ever known. Father Bob recently celebrated 66 years of his priestly ministry, and it is a ministry that has been very, very rich in life experience. And some of us have had the privilege of spending a lot of time with him over this pandemic. And as he has told us some of the stories about his prior parish experience, we've really been wanting to share it with the rest of you. So one area in particular that's really on all of our minds that Father Bob has had a lot of experience with is this area of racial diversity, given some of his parish assignments. So we asked him to come by today and share with us. So, Father Bob.
Thank you very much for inviting me to share with you the experiences that I was privileged to have, both at Immaculate Conception Church from 1960 to 1973, and also in St. Mary's of the Lake Church in Ontario, where I was for 18 years. And the common bond between those two parishes, because there were two other parishes that I served, as well as here at St. Joseph's, was St. Alphonsus in Auburn and Resurrection in Fairport. But the thing that binds Immaculate and the St. Mary's of the Lake is that my ministry in those parishes involved interracial work, and it involved kind of a common problem. The problem at Immaculate in that community was police brutality, which gave rise to a riot in 1960. And at St. Mary's of the Lake, the problem was the immigration authorities that were constantly, striking fear into the Hispanic community that was working in Wayne County. So those are the common points between those two parishes that I served in, and we're concentrating on the cultural diversity today. And my experience began in 1960. I had been in St. Alphonsus for 6.5 years, which in itself was very unusual for a new priest. And I got a call from Bishop Casey asking me to come and see him. I went up to Rochester. He told me that the Josephite father, who had been serving as an associate at the parish, was leaving. If you are not familiar with the fathers, Josephites, they have a special ministry to the Black community. So he asked me if I was willing to go, which again was unusual because you're usually told where you're to go. But he didn't want anyone to go there that wouldn't be willing to go. So I told him I was willing, but I wasn't qualified. I had never had any experiences with Afro-Americans, even though I lived across the river from the neighborhood and never had met or spoke with or thought really much about the Black community. But I was willing to learn. And so I came to serve there. And I had a great advantage coming as a priest. I wasn't coming as a do-gooder. Very often they were looked upon as people who were doing more good to themselves than to the people they were serving, although, there was always a good motivation too. But the point was, I wasn't going to just come in and go out. I was there for 12 and a half years. And I learned a lot because I went in, as I said, with kind of a tabula rasa. And nevertheless, I had marvelous opportunities to meet people on a ground that I did know, which was namely church. Immaculate was a small community at that time. It was an interracial parish. It was, the Black community was small. It was, I think, the largest Black Catholic community in the city, but traditionally, Black people were not Catholic. There was some exception to that because there was a group of our parishioners at Immaculate who came from a town in Louisiana called New Iberia, and it was established by the Spanish. So there were a number of Catholic Black people that came up north and brought, their faith with them, and they were a part of Immaculate, and they were strong in their faith, and the other part of the community, Black community there, were mostly people who were converts. The people that came from New Iberia were kind of cradle Catholics, whereas the other people who came had been converted to Catholicism. As I say, the church in general, in the North, especially in Rochester, had not had really experience and didn't really pay a great deal of attention. When I moved to Immaculate, there were two other priests there, the pastor and an associate, and the associate was an older priest and would soon be appointed to pastor a parish. And the pastor, who was, a very, very dedicated priest, but not so much to the parish because he had other assignments as head of the Catholic Courier and other jobs with the propagation of the faith and so forth. So he was kind of an absentee pastor, but he had the authority and I didn't. And so that was a little bit of difficulty. I learned, from the very beginning, and never stopped learning until I left, and still I'm learning today about the issues that Black people face. We can know the issues, we can learn about them. In fact, I had the help of Father Charlie Hall, who became a Josephite father. Regrettably, in one sense, he could have been a diocesan priest, except that the diocese wouldn't accept him. And so he went. That, I think, is a sign of the insensitivity of the diocese to, the issues surrounding this whole discussion. I'm not so much criticizing because I just think there was a failure to have any knowledge of how to relate as an institution, a large institution, to the Black community. And Charlie was a great advocate for me because he told me, what I should read, what I should learn about the background of Black people, and there are other experiences besides the fact of slavery and what went on since. And as I say, I could learn, but, all of us can learn, but we never really experience the pain that the Black people have and the fears that people have because, as I say, especially of the issue between the relationship of the community with the police or the immigration authorities. Outside of the church, the community was on the south side of Rochester. Immaculate was in the Cornhill district or the old Third Ward. And that area had undergone a radical change. It was at one time a very, upscale area. If you just took a drive, and you still can, and see some very, very beautiful homes, large houses, where some people even had Japanese servants, I'm told. But during the course of the late 50s and 60s, 20,000 people moved out of that area of the city. And that's when they were replaced by the Black community. When I went there, as I say, we had a school which at the time was practically all white. I think we had one or two or very small number of Black students in the school. When I left, we had 250 students with one white student in the school. So you get this sense of the change that is going on, that a lot of times when you're living in it, you don't realizing that things are changing drastically. In 1963, there was the March on Washington. And I was privileged to be there with many people from Rochester. A number of buses went down. And we had the good fortune of being very close. You could see the crowd in the view here, but we were right up front, not far from where Martin Luther King spoke. And again, it was a little bit sad that there was not much of a Catholic presence up on the platform. There was a speaker from the Catholic Interracial Council, but there were no real church representatives from the bishops and so forth. Again, I think it's just a lack of sensitivity at that time to the needs of the people, and really, just as many other white people, did not have those sensitivities either. But it was a great experience to be at the beginning of what still is going on today with the marches that are taking place. One of the big differences today is that many white people are there in the marches. Many young people I think are much more aware than they were in 1963 of the issues that face the Black community. I mentioned that there was a speaker there, the head of the Interracial Council Union. We had a interracial council in Rochester too, and I was privileged to work with them for quite a few years. And the Catholic Interracial Council studied some of the issues that were taking place in the community. And they focused their efforts on especially the issue of housing. One of the problems was, of course, segregation. And people were actively being segregated in Rochester by means of redlining. This took place subtly in some ways with the cooperation of realtors and so forth, and people in neighborhoods that were not open to having Black neighbors in around them. And so the council, we formed a speakers bureau, and we went out to speak in parishes. And it didn't last very long, because it wasn't long before we felt, anyway, that it wasn't being very effective. People afterwards, we would speak at small groups in parishes, and people would come up and say, "Oh, that is a serious problem, isn't it?" And kind of left us with the feeling it was our problem. So one of our great Black Catholic laymen, Jim Dobson, kind of got fed up with it and decided he was going to do something that he felt was much more significant. He was going to build decent housing for the community. And he set out and became very successful. He built an urban park in the area, had a high-rise, one high-rise building, forget the number of units in there, but there were also many individual houses. Jim was a wonderful person, especially a wonderful resource for me. Not only he, but his wife. One of his daughters also eventually became on the staff of the diocese, worked with the Office of Black Community Relations. And but things were not getting better at all in the community with the Black people. Not only housing an issue, but police relationships was a very serious issue. And in 1960, we had the first riot in the United States, took place in Rochester. It was the long, hot summer, as it became to be called. And it began on the north side of the city. And that was on a Saturday night, hot Saturday night. And the issue began and became a little violent. And the next day, on Sunday, it moved to the west side, where Immaculate is located. We could hear glass breaking at night, and as the movement was going on, and stores were looted, and many of the Black people in the neighborhood were even a little very edgy and scared. I mentioned that we could hear the breaking of glass. A lot of that glass breaking took place in the public school that was right across from our school. But interestingly enough, not a window was broken in our school. I'm not just sure why. Maybe because, the windows were broken by the students that went to those schools, and our students did not do that. But Sunday afternoon, there was a terrific accident. A helicopter crashed into a house on Clarissa Street, which is right behind the church. And that incident was like putting, water on the fire. Because of a person dying in that, the riot came to an end. But the issues never came to an end. As we know today, those issues are still alive. And but I think we are much more hopeful today because we see the participation of so many white people have joined because their consciences have been awakened to the issues, and they feel that their silence would be part of it. That's what the way I see it anyway, and I think it's very hopeful that these protests are taking place and have a whole different, I think, orientation. It looks as if, to me anyway, that some of these issues are really going to be resolved, or at least worked on significantly. And if they aren't, I think, the unrest will continue until justice, really is done for everybody. I hope too that the issue of immigration, which is still, even maybe more so a burning issue today in our country, in certain areas. So these are the issues that I have seen, and still feel that as I say, I've learned a lot, but I know that, I don't have the same pain that comes from losing a relative by being shot, or I don't realize the pain of the fear that migrant workers have of moving about in the community. As the pictures show here, they do very, very hard work that most people are not willing to do. And there again, as I say, most of us have never had to face those issues, being afraid to walk out on the street, or being afraid to know whether one of your loved ones is coming home, or whether they might have had an incident. I think that, pretty well sums it up as I recall.
Well, thank you, Father Bob. I think one of the things on some of our minds is when you were taking part in the March on Washington. So 2 questions. One is, did you do that with the blessing of the diocese going down to that march? And the other is, when you were there, did you have a sense of being a part of history being made?
For your last question, did I have a sense of history being made? Oh, yes. Just standing there from the point where we were, where we could see that whole, concourse just full of people. And of course, hearing Dr. King's voice, and articulating the issues, you just felt that this was something very, very different, very, very unique, very, very historical. I was not there with the permission of the diocese. In fact, I had been, I don't think they would have objected, but the pastor did. He didn't want me to go. Partly maybe because he was the chaplain of the police department, and had maybe strong views on that particular issue, which was a very prominent issue in Rochester. It wasn't the main issue in the drive at that time. It is today, but there were other issues that Dr. King was concerned about. He was concerned about jobs. He was concerned about all aspects of justice and injustice, not just the police issue. But as I say, it was a big thing that was on the mind of many in Rochester.
You remind me of something that you shared with us one day about the experience, I think it was after the riots, where you went on, did you go on TV and actually make a statement for the diocese about that?
Well, yes. By that time, there was, we had contact with the diocese. The Protestant community was being vocal about making issues. They had, more connection. They had an office of civic affairs, which at the time we did not. But I was asked to, get the diocese to make a statement, and they did, and they read it. I read it on TV, but I found out later that at the same time I was reading that statement on TV, Bishop Carney was also on TV making a statement that strongly, supported the police. So, that's the way it was then. I say we were not, as a Catholic community, highly sensitive to the issues that the Afro-American community was experiencing. I must say that another aspect of Immaculate was that we did have, white parishioners. Some of them were people who were living in the neighborhood. They didn't have the means to move out into better housing and so forth. But we also had, after a number of years, a lot of white social activists who came to the parish to worship on the weekends. This was, at this time, I would say it was after Vatican II, excuse me, which of course took place, in the 60s. And as we began to make the changes in the way we worshiped and so forth, Immaculate became a draw for a certain type of white person who was interested in and found a desire to worship with the Black community, and it was very helpful in many ways, not the least of which was financial, because the parish, was not supported except for the school. I didn't mention I mentioned briefly our school, but I would have to say that the Catholic school was one opportunity that the church had to make a significant contribution to the Black community. The schools have always been a problem with the Black community. They've always been underfunded, and our small school was funded by the diocese, and in fact, it got very, very expensive. And it was a very, very sad thing that after 73, after I left in 73, and shortly after, the Catholic school at Immaculate was closed and no longer was able to serve them directly. The U of R came in with some special services. I wasn't really very familiar with it, but it became a great source of funding for the parish. They occupied the school, and I understand they provide, significant services to the community. But it was sad when we had to lose our Catholic schools.
Father Bob, would you, from your perspective, clearly you've made, given us a very clear picture that the community at large and following our diocese wasn't, especially aware of the issues going on, in the Black community, perhaps not out of any sense of dismissing it, but just lack of awareness. Do you think we've evolved in our sense of social justice?
Yes, actually, eventually, eventually I became pastor after 6.5 years there, and Dave Finks came in as associate pastor, and we both went to the diocese, and out of that discussion, the diocese established the urban ministry office, and that was a step forward, And interestingly enough, one of the staff persons on that urban ministry office, which worked closely with Immaculate, because we had the larger Black Catholic community, was Sister Grace Miller. She worked with Dave on the staff. And I believe that that was her introduction, to ministry in the Black community through the Office of Urban Ministry. And then she went on to do great work, and still is doing it, and has made a major contribution to the community. I don't think we can say enough for the work that she has done, both in direct ministry. Her ministry was direct in the sense of dealing with the needs of individuals, as well as advocating before city council and others. She was certainly a wonderful minister.
Truly a modern day saint, wouldn't you say?
Right.
That's wonderful. I wanted to mention that Sharon Burke, who is watching, has let us know about an event coming up on June 20th, the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, and that's a digital gathering. So Sharon, feel free to send us some more information so that we could get that out to the parish. Yes. If anyone has other questions for Father Bob, you're welcome to share them now, or else we're going to kind of wrap it up for today, but you're always welcome to forward questions to me, and I'll get them off to Father Bob, and we can continue this dialogue. We've kind of, I think, gotten a promise from Father Bob that he's going to come back and do this another day and talk about his experience also of being a pre-Vatican I minister and a post-Vatican II pastor, and share with us a bit about that experience as well. So, Father Bob, we thank you so much for being with us here today, and we'll certainly want to continue this dialogue in the future. A couple of people have just written in thanking you for these wonderful stories and also for your personal insight. And also would say that, my prayer for all of us would be that we would all have the ability to grow from our experience of getting to know people different from ourselves and really bring that to our prayer and, see it as an opportunity for our own growth as opposed to focusing on our differences. So we thank you very, very much, and we'll look forward to webinar number 2 with Father Bob.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We will be posting information about our next webinar and hoping to get a series started soon on the liturgy, and always welcome your ideas for new topics as well. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again soon.